I'm going to be doing something a little bit different in this one. It's going to be a little bit like, could say a video essay. And I'm going to be looking at some things that make certain techniques look aesthetic. And one of the definitions of aesthetic is concerned with beauty or the appreciation of beauty. And I want to make this video because I'm trying to include a bit of different content and some of the things that I'm really interested in, and I don't want to get pigeonholed into just making the same videos all the time. So in all honesty, you may have heard me say this before, but my beginnings in martial arts actually came from films, and that's where, you know, the techniques all look super aesthetic. And I know they shoot it in a certain way to make it look better with angles and stuff like that, but there are a lot of underlying principles from the performers themselves that make this stuff look really good. I want to address something before we get started, and that's that aesthetic does not mean that it's functionless. There are certain things these performers do to make the techniques look more beautiful, you could say, but often the lines are blurred because when a technique looks good, it generally is good. So most pro boxers' punches look nice, and that's because they're effective, and the eye knows that when it sees it. So there is a lot of crossover, and this stuff can be applied into fight training as well. So I'm going to be looking at some clips from some films. I'm going to look at some of them and sort of point out some of these certain things, and also looking at some of my own footage as well, because one of the most common compliments, I guess you could say, that I get is my techniques look very clean and they look really nice, and a lot of people really desire that. So the first thing that I want to point out is to make a technique aesthetic, there needs to be a big clarity of movement, especially between their lines and the shapes of the techniques. So when everything blurs together, you can't really tell what's going on, and there's not much definition between the punches. In these films, things like strikes, blocks, and kicks are all delivered with really clean and extended lines, meaning their arms are fully extended, their stances are deep and rooted, and their postures are very symmetrical. And this is always something I aim to do when I'm training myself, particularly in shadowboxing. I like to really straighten my arms out, get that full rotation through the hips, and then sending all of that energy into the strike through the kinetic chain. And again, that's not just an aesthetic thing, you know, like you want to train to be able to extend so that even if, say, an opponent's closer to you in a real situation, you're already in position to strike. And when a person's very well versed in this, the movements often resolve into quite recognizable shapes, almost like calligraphy in a sense. You know, each movement sort of pauses briefly in a form before going on. And this is the same like if you're striking a bag or something. And I think for me, although this isn't something I train anymore, one of the reasons that I'm quite good at this, you know, when shadowboxing or performing techniques like nice fluid kicks and stuff like that, is actually from traditional martial arts training. Like I did Taekwondo, was my sort of base style, and that has a lot of forms and stuff, you know, the katas, and a lot of people think that these are just pointless and they're not good for fighting, but they're absolutely amazing for developing that sharpness and that relaxation, that stop-start nature that are so vital in striking techniques. Number two is a variation in speed, so everything isn't just done at one tempo. So a martial artist with good aesthetic technique will very rarely move at a single tempo, and there's, you know, a mix of sudden bursts of explosive speed and then deliberate, slower, controlled, and more delicate movements, especially in terms of, you know, transitioning between footwork patterns and things like that. For instance, something like a crisp snap into a punching technique followed by a fluid sweeping motion, then a sudden stop, creates a contrast and a rhythm, which is a little bit like dance. And I'm really interested in dance as well, and I really like these things with these kind of movements because it's so well related to martial arts. And I think that of all disciplines, dance and martial arts could be very interrelated, and, you know, a practitioner from one could quite easily transition and be skilled in the other. So somebody like Jet Li is very good at showing what I would call stored energy or potential before unleashing it into a strike, and that really comes across on screen as well. The next point, touching on something I mentioned right at the beginning, is that extension and whip-like power, so really extending the techniques. So instead of really compact strikes, as we often see in infighting on screen, or to make those techniques more aesthetic, the movements are often extended outward with a kind of slight flourish, you could call it, at the end. So a kick will be snapped out, and then there'll be a very nice rechamber of that kick, a pause, kind of like a snapping motion or a back fist with a bit of extra follow through. And the body is used like a whip. So the hips and shoulders and everything coil in nice and tight and then release, creating a visible flow of power throughout the whole movement. And like with all of this stuff, I'll just mention as well, this is all something that you can really bring into your training. For me, subconsciously, because I've done it for so long in this way that it just sort of happens for me. And I've mentioned before that I used to watch these people on screen and just think that that's how the techniques were done because that's how those guys perform them. So it makes sense why my techniques look like this as well. But this is something you can bring into your training, really focusing on those elements and creating that clean technique. The next point is balance and being rooted into the ground. Even in things like fast exchanges or a fast flurry of punches, there's always an underlying sense of groundedness. The people are not falling off balance, they're not kind of like stepping and not taking any more movements than they really need to. So your stance wants to keep you very stable, so your movements look powerful rather than flimsy. And I always say to people that I'm training, you know, like you can move around as much as you want, but when you strike, make sure your feet are rooted. When those lines get blurred and people start moving their feet as they strike, it all falls apart and they haven't got any power. And somebody like Donnie Yen, who's one of my favorite martial artists to watch on screen, often shifts between very rooted and strong stances and then into springy explosive movements, which adds kind of a dynamism to his moves. The next thing I want to speak about is circularity and flow. So movements that look very nice to the eye often arc or spiral rather than go in straight lines. So you'll see things like sweeps, spins, or, you know, weapon movements even. They give this sense of fluidity and grace, which is quite different from modern MMA, for instance, you know, which is more about direct efficiency. And this is a thing Bruce Lee certainly understood as well, is that the things that he did on screen, but he wasn't necessarily practicing those in his JKD, which was all about efficiency and the direct path to the target. This next one is really big for any martial artist, which is an expression of intent. So whenever something is in a movie, for instance, it's obviously going to be exaggerated with things like facial expressions and really, I would call it explosive body language, if that's a term. But I think this helps any martial artist because many people really struggle to let go in their techniques, as I've mentioned a lot of times, and put everything into it. And it makes each strike feel like it really carries weight and meaning, and it's not just a random motion. But you can also bring a lot of that into your actual training because it forces you to use the body in a more explosive and intentful manner. And the last point is something that I'm incredibly interested in, which is martial arts as performance and the sort of artistic side of martial arts. This is really what I'm interested in. And I think with a lot of the ways I train, which is say like just a boxer or a kickboxer or something like that, people don't understand what I'm trying to do in a way. And I've always loved that artistic process. I just happen to enjoy those training methods because they're the stuff that really levels you up the most. But many of, say, the well-known guys like Jet Li, Donnie Yen and Jackie Chan trained in these performative arts like wushu and Chinese opera, which, you know, blends martial arts effectiveness, the real side of the martial arts, with a sort of performance artistry. Wushu is a martial art I was always very interested in and I think has sort of found its way into my style a little bit. But wushu is a martial art that is designed to be watched, emphasizing elegance, flexibility and self-expression, and that's something that I am very, very interested in. Martial arts for me, as I've said, is art. I get into a flow state, I feel like I'm expressing myself and just feel more like my best version of myself when I'm training. And I would say that's why when you watch my movements, they appear to the eye as both authentic martial arts techniques, but also with a kind of theatrical element to them as well. And that's very much intentional on my part. And I want to just wrap up this video by stating that I think there's certainly a space for both things here. You know, like often people who are quite close-minded think that something is either theatrical or it's real with no line in the middle. And that's not true at all. Like, as I already mentioned, there are very few professional martial artists and boxers who have ugly technique. Their techniques take on that theatrical element because they have incredible body control and they have great economy of motion, which all goes into the same thing. And I would go as far as to state, once you obviously understand the basic techniques and you've got a degree of training, is to try and bring more of that element to your movements, because above anything else, it's going to give you greater control of your body, which is always a good thing. Like I've stated before, that people say that all those flashy techniques are just, you know, for show and stuff like that. But if you can execute an explosive spinning hook kick with great economy of motion and control, think how much skill you have to be able to do that in your body and how that's going to translate to lesser skills. You don't want to be somebody whose highest level technique is just a low, powerful kick to the thigh. You want to be able to do more things with your body and have the options there if you would like them. So just as a summary, in order to make these techniques look aesthetic, it's a combination of martial clarity, let's say, you know, clean lines, rooted stances, a good flow of power, with a performative rhythm, shifting in tempo, circularity, extension, and intent behind the movements. It's a mix of both combat techniques and performance, and I really believe that the highest level martial artists understand this, and those who throw it out and say only stuff that works matters don't really have an understanding of the deeper elements of the self-expression and, like I said, the artistic side of martial arts. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Like I said, a bit of a different one today, but exploring something that I find really interesting and actually something that underlies a lot of the content I make. This is sort of in the background of a lot of that stuff, but I just wanted to make a video being a bit more blatant about it. So let me know if you liked it, guys, and I will see you in the next one.